day a man told me Indigenous people should modernize and stop eating animal products. And who the f*** are you, seeing as you wouldn't exist without them, I told him. He did not like this!
I'm vegan, I just think it's wrong, he says to me.
Well, those gobshite Puritan ancestors didn't seem to think it was wrong when it kept them from freezing to death in the cold winters. Yes, that's right. The only reason you exist is because natives taught your good-for-nothing white supremacist pilgrim ancestors how to live off the land because they were dying. And then the powdered wig goblins turned around and massacred them, turning their nose up at the very people who'd kept them alive. Much like what you're doing right now.
Like genocidal great-grandpappy, like genocidal great-grandson, I guess.
And to talk about modernizing, native people selectively genetically engineered corn over 9,000 years ago, which was about 8,000 years earlier than your ancestors in the street and causing the plague. Catch up, stupid.
Hey, colonizer.
Ganga, Beskarmukarino, Audrey and Deliwas.
Let's talk about the myth that is Thanksgiving.
It's just like Malcolm X said. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. Plymouth, to me, it's not America's hometown. Plymouth, to me, is nothing more than a continuing the mythology. We don't see any reason to celebrate the arrival of the Pilgrims. What the heck did they do for us? Nothing. My name is Munanam James. I'm a member of the Aquina-Wampanoag tribe of Gay Head, co-leader of United American Indians of New England, and an organizer of the National Day of Mourning. Here it is, Plymouth Pebble. If anyone thinks that this is where the Pilgrims stepped ashore, like I said, they had unbelievably long legs.
The only historical documentation of the first Thanksgiving comes from a journal entry from Governor William Bradford of Plymouth Plantation.
They thus arrived at Cape Cod on the 11th of November, and necessity called on them to look out for a place of habitation. They came ashore, and as they did, they encountered a few natives, not very close, so they tried to follow them into the woods, but they really couldn't keep track, and eventually they got a little bit lost and stumbled upon some native houses and farms that had been abandoned. This is what Bradford writes. Proceeding further, they saw stubble where corn had been grown the same year, and also found a place where a house had lately been, with some planks and a great kettle, and heaps of sand newly banked, under which they found several large baskets filled with corn. They took part of the corn and buried the rest. A little farther on, Bradford writes, they also found 2 of the Indians' houses covered with mats, and some of their implements in them, but the people had run away and could not be seen. They also found more corn and beans of various colors. These they brought away, intending to give them full satisfaction when they should meet with any of them, as about 6 months afterwards they did. Never mind the fact that 6 months later would have made it May, and those native people may have been counting on that corn and beans to get them through their winter, not to be stolen by colonizers.
Colonizer, you're a colonizer, call a colonizer, oh, you're a colonizer, baby, you're a colonizer, you are, you are, colonizer, colonizer, colonizer.
Nevertheless, of course, the Puritans gave all the credit for their good fortune to God. Bradford writes, and it is to be noted as a special providence of God and a great mercy to this poor people that they thus got seed to plant corn the next year, or they might have starved, for they had none, nor any likelihood of getting any till too late for the planting season.
Most of American history depicts a hospitable first Thanksgiving. 1621, grateful pilgrims in the New World offer a warm invitation to Usamiquin and members of his Wampanoag tribe. But the chairman of the Mashpee Wampanoags calls that depiction a myth.
First and foremost, we must acknowledge that there was an agreement of mutual protection between the colonists of Plymouth Plantation and Chief Massawit of the Wampanoag people. The Plymouth Plantation was gathering around their small harvest, and he noted the game that they successfully captured and the fish that they stored. During this gathering, the colonist militiamen fired their weapons in a loud commotion, and not long after, 90 Wampanoag men showed up ready for battle.
You know, we sent 90 men over to the first settlers to see why they were shooting guns and practicing arms, to say, hey, what are you preparing for? And they were preparing for some kind of war to take our people down. And so we sat down with them to have a discussion, and there led a feast.
Now this is important, because the Wampanoag people showed up ready for battle and were not invited, as the myth suggests.
It's true that 1621 Wampanoag tribe shared a feast with the Plymouth settlers, but that is not the real reason that Thanksgiving is a holiday now.
Other historians point to 1637 as the beginning of Thanksgiving as we know it, when Governor John Winthrop of Massachusetts declared a day of celebration when soldiers returned from slaughtering hundreds of Pequot men, women, and children.
So 1637, the Pequot tribe was celebrating their green corn harvest, and early hours of the morning, English and Dutch mercenaries surrounded their tribe and demanded that they come outside. The ones who did were clubbed to death and shot. The women and children who huddled in the longhouses, afraid, were burned alive. The next day, the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony declared that day a day of Thanksgiving.
They then made the attack with great courage, speedily forcing an entrance to the fort and shooting amongst them. Those that entered first met with fierce resistance, the enemy shooting and grappling with them. Others of the attacking party ran to their houses and set them on fire, the mats catching quickly, and all standing close together, the wind soon fanned them into a blaze. In fact, more were burnt to death than killed otherwise. It burnt their bowstrings and made their weapons useless, and those that escaped the fire were slain by the sword, some hewn to pieces, others run through with their rapiers, so they were quickly dispatched, and very few escaped. It is believed that there were about 400 killed. It was a fearful fight to see them frying in the fire, with streams of blood quenching it. The smell was horrible, but the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they gave praise to God who had wrought so wonderfully for them, thus to enclose their enemy and give them so speedy a victory over such a proud and insulting foe.
And then after that, all pumped up from their victory, went and attacked village after village, Wampanoag included, to where they beheaded the Wampanoag chief and impaled his head on a spike and put it on display. There was multiple days to celebrate these massacres, but then George Washington suggested, there should be one day.
Then, in 1863, Abraham Lincoln nationalized the holiday through a proclamation.
And then right after, declared war on the Sioux Nation in Minnesota.
Do I celebrate Thanksgiving? No. For me and other Native American people, it is a national day of mourning. It is a day to remember the sacrifice of our ancestors.
All my research,
Some elders say the so-called first Thanksgiving is not worth celebrating.
It's the one day out of the year when all of America bows their head and gives thanks for everything that was taken from us.
My father started National Day of Mourning in 1970 because he had been invited to address a big banquet of dignitaries and all this kind of thing, and they asked for a copy of his speech in advance, which he sent. And then within days, they came back and said, you can't give this speech. It's too inflammatory. The Pilgrims and the Indians sat down to a beautiful dinner and lived happily ever after. The end.
83-year-old Tall Oaks, Rhode Island home is an archive of Native American history. Amongst the books and pictures and relics is a copy of a 1970 speech written by his late friend Wamsutta. He'd been invited to a celebration of the arrival of the Mayflower.
When he had to give the speech, he put it all together, and when he presented it to them, they said that Well, we can't allow you to read that because 90% of the people would walk out.
We, the Wampanoag, Wamsutta wrote, welcomed you, the white man, with open arms, little knowing that it was the beginning of the end.
He said he wasn't going to change it, and so he withdrew from that.
And Wamsutta, Tall Oak, and other activists of the American Indian movement created their own event for the following Thanksgiving Day.
We decided that we would declare it a national day of mourning for Native people.
And every fourth Thursday of November since, Native Americans have gathered at the statue of Massasoit on Coles Hill in Plymouth to tell the truth that Wamsutta could not.
He was censored, plain and simple. It got out under the Moccasin Telegraph, and a few hundred Indigenous Native people came to Plymouth and they declared it a national day of mourning. And this year marks our 48th year of being on this hill. Really, and that's what this all means, the oppression, and the oppression has not ceased. It hasn't ceased. We continue to experience it every time I read that. And I do have to stop because that's hard. It's hard to read it. That's what Day of Mourning means. We stand here in our circle, we have our prayer, we have whatever, and then we speak.
Every inch of this land is Indian land. We are as strong as ever.
Our rates of suicide, our rates of alcoholism, poverty, all these nothing's really changed. But every year when we come here, we're trying to at least make people aware of things like that. It's just so ridiculous. We're all human beings. I think the problem is they think that we've disappeared. We have not vanished. We have not been conquered. We are still here. What else can I say?
So that is the reason Native Americans associate Thanksgiving with massacre, and when you celebrate it, you're also celebrating those massacres. And I know some people are saying, oh, like, we don't celebrate the actual Thanksgiving, it's just a time to gather with family and, like, togetherness. But if you're going to do that, you should recognize that and take time to know that your family tradition began with the celebration of the massacres of those tribes.
We mourn the relatives who never were because of genocide. We mourn for our stolen lands. We mourn because our struggles are not over.